In this instructional video, we will show you how to replace your variable valve time, gaskets, and filter. All of these components, you'll find that they fit on the top of the variable valve time cover. Let's start with this flat one first. And this flat one sits underneath the oil control valve, which is that big unit that has a pipe that goes to it. At that pipe where it mates with the upper part of the housing, that's where this black O-ring goes. Now, where that pipe mates, you will also need a filter for that oil coming through the pipe. So that's where this unit goes. And we'll show you more how this goes put together in the video. Now, we're going to move over to these O-rings. You will notice that you have two smaller black ones. Then you have two slightly bigger brown rings. Then you have a fifth O-ring, but it's not related to any of these, even though it's the same size. So let's focus on the two black ones and the two bigger brown ones. Those four O-rings sit underneath the oil control valve in a pipe adapter that feeds oil through that control valve into the phaser. Now, what about this fifth O-ring? Well, that one goes on the solenoid that goes on the side of that oil control valve. So again, you have an O-ring, then you have four that go into the adapter pipe that goes underneath this oil control valve mechanism that sits on top of this flat gasket, that then will have an O-ring that sits in between it and the pipe, as well as a filter that sits between the housing and the pipe. Now let's discuss the tools that you will need. It's not really a lot of them. First of all, you'll need to start with a pick. You can either use a pick, flathead screwdriver, something you can use to pull off those O-rings. Next, you'll need a small ratchet. You need a 10mm socket. An extension would be really useful. A 19mm wrench and an inch-pound torque wrench. This is a pretty simple job. It should take about 20 minutes. So once you've got all your tools gathered, just make sure you got your drink of choice and we can go ahead and get started. Once you've got yourself set up, we're going to go ahead and start with the pipe that you see at the very top. Now for this, we are going to need a 19mm wrench. We have one that happens to be a gear wrench. So what you're going to do is go to the back over here. You're going to start taking this pipe apart. Disconnecting the cam sensor is a good idea. Get on the banjo bolt, the 19mm banjo bolt that holds the back of the pipe nice and tight. And all you need to do is break it loose, as you can see there. Once you've done that, your next step is get your ratchet with a 10mm socket on it. Going to start by taking off the holder for the pipe. Then we're going to go to the back where you're going to see the two 10mm bolts that hold the end of the pipe down to the valve cover. Once you've removed those bolts, we're going to go ahead and remove these two 10 that hold the pipe onto the oil control valve on top of the valve cover. Now, as you remove all these bolts, it's a really good idea to keep them all in order or somehow where you know where each bolt goes because they are different sizes. Something useful to do is probably to disconnect excess wiring, such as the coil packs. You can disconnect the oxygen sensor, and that will allow you to take all of this extra wiring and move it out of the way. That way you have more space to work with, such as the pipe. Now, being that we don't have to remove the pipe completely, what you can do is rest it against the firewall, and you can lock it down at the banjo bolt. Just snug it down just ever so slightly, and that way the pipe stays out of the way and doesn't fall on you while you're working on the rest of the VVT mechanisms. Now we can go ahead and take our pick and remove the O-ring that sits on top of the oil control valve and between the pipe. Be gentle not to score any of the metal materials. Sometimes, as you'll see here, they'll be a little hard to get out, especially if they've been in there for a long time. Next, we're going to go ahead and disconnect the solenoid that goes into the oil control valve housing. There's a 10mm bolt on the side of it. Once you take that bolt off, it will allow you to slide that solenoid out. Next, we have the four bolts that hold the oil control valve housing on top of the valve cover. They're 10mm bolts. Let's go ahead and break them loose and then pull them off. Once you remove the four bolts, take the oil control valve mechanism and pull straight up, and then you'll see the adapter there as well as the flat gasket. Go ahead and take the old gasket and chuck that. And then now that you've got this oil control valve housing off, you'll see the little adapter here is completely exposed. Now this little unit here is what the pipe connects to, allowing oil to go through into the phaser. We're going to go ahead and remove it. You're going to need your 10mm socket. Take that 10mm bolt off. Once you're done there, you're going to want to remove that adapter out. And it's really simple. You just grab it, wiggle it, and pull it straight up. And it'll come out like so. Once you've pulled it out, you'll see where the 4 O-rings sit on this adapter unit. And of course, make sure that you clean up your area so you have clean mating surfaces for the new gaskets. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and replace this solenoid O-ring first. Obviously grab your tool, go ahead and start prying on the O-ring, and just gently pull it out. It should come right out without marring any of the surfaces. So there's our old parts there. Throw those aside. The brown small O-ring will go on here. And any leftover oil is great because it'll help lubricate it. You can see how much harder it is to get that O-ring in as opposed to the previous one. Use your tool to kind of help you without, once again, scoring anything. Just be gentle. Just try and work that O-ring in there. Slowly and gently work it all the way down. Now, remember, it goes here, not here. So it's very important that we make it to that last ridge, because it'll like to lock itself. There we go. So it's locked on that very, very last ridge. So next, we're going to go ahead and replace the O-rings on this unit here. It's the same thing. Grab your tool. Once again, be very careful. Pry off O-ring number 1. Pry off O-ring number 2. And 4. See, 2 big ones, 2 small ones. Give me your 2 big ones and your 2 small ones. We'll start with the bigger one. So the 2 upper O-rings first, like so. 2 lower O-rings, like so. And now you're good to put this guy back in. As we get ready to put the adapter back in, you can add a little bit of oil, and remember the small side goes down. Add a little bit of oil on it, just press straight down and it'll fall right into place, like so. Next, you're going to take your 10mm bolt and slide it into place. Do keep in mind this is a small bolt, so we torque it down to 75 inch-pounds, and that is enough. Once we've done that, we go on to the flat gasket. We're going to go ahead and lay that down. And make sure all your surfaces are clean. This is a metal gasket, so you need to avoid any debris. So we're going to take our oil control valve, this mechanism here, and make sure that it's nice and clean before we lay it down. Once you got it nice and clean, all you got to do is overlay it on the adapter, slide it on gently, and with pressure wiggle it down into place. Next, you'll put your 4 bolts in, and once you've put them in, we're going to go ahead and tighten that gasket down. Those bolts tighten down to 75 inch-pounds. And when you tighten these, you're going to tighten them in a star pattern, just like you would on your wheels. In this particular case, a cross pattern. Diagonal this way and then this way. Once you've tightened those down, we'll go ahead and take the solenoid that goes on the side of that housing and slide that sucker in. You can add a little bit of oil to help you put it in place. Make sure it's nice and tight, and then put a 10mm bolt right back in. This one does not need to be torqued, it simply needs to be snug. And obviously don't forget to connect the solenoid. Now we're going to go ahead and replace the O-ring that goes between the pipe and the oil control valve. Put the O-ring down, and one of the things that you can do to help it seat properly is add a little bit of oil. Take a little bit of oil there and kind of just put it around the O-ring. Now at the end of the pipe, we're going to go ahead and add the filter, and that just clips in like so. Very simple. Once you got the filter on, we're going to go ahead and loosen the pipe and start dropping it into place. You'll see the filter goes through that little hole, and the oil that's on that black O-ring will allow it to seat better when you get around to tightening that pipe. And we're going to tighten it down to 75 inch-pounds. Again, 75 inch-pounds. As far as the rest of the bolts, like the one that holds the support and the ones in the back, those don't need to be torqued down. They just need to be snugged down. Next, you want to take your 19mm wrench and snug down that banjo bolt in the back. Now it is a fairly large bolt, so you can put a little bit of elbow grease on it just to make sure it's nice and snug. Once that's done, you're going to want to go through the rest of your wiring and plug it all back together. Make sure all your connectors are connected, and fire up your car to check for any leaks. Congratulations, you have just replaced all your gaskets on your variable valve time mechanism.